The letter said he needed a capable woman. It did not say he would look at her like she was a problem he hadn't yet decided whether to solve. Susannah Briggs stepped off the riverboat at Heron Landing, Oregon Territory, on a Thursday in April with a travel trunk, a carpet bag, and the kind of composed face she had perfected over 2 years of dressing wounds, and holding down frightened men while doctors worked. She had not come this far to be rattled by one man's cold gray eyes. Dorian Falk stood at the edge of the dock with his arms crossed and his jaw set, wearing the expression of a man who had agreed to something in a moment of practicality and had been reconsidering it since. He was tall and lean, somewhere in his early 40s, with a scar along the left side of his jaw that pulled slightly when he moved his mouth. He did not move toward her. "Miss Briggs," he said, not a question, not a welcome. "Mr. Falk." She walked to him and put out her hand. He took it, and she noticed the grip was careful, controlled, the grip of a man managing something. "It's a pleasure." "You're younger than the agency indicated," he said. "You're quieter than your letter suggested," she replied. Something shifted in the back of his eyes, not warmth, a recalibration. "Agnes will show you to the house," he said. "Supper is your responsibility as of tonight." He turned and walked back up the dock toward the tree line where the mill sat, its steam whistle just then letting out a long flat note across the river. Susannah watched him go. A woman of perhaps 60 appeared at her elbow, stocky and deliberate, with a face like weathered pine board and eyes considerably kinder than everything else about her. "Agnes Pryor," the woman said. "I cook, I clean, I keep this place from falling into the river. You must be the one he sent for." "Susannah Briggs, that's me." Agnes looked her over the way a person looks over equipment they didn't order and aren't sure will fit. "He'll be difficult," she said. "I gathered. More difficult than you're thinking." "I usually find it's less than I'm warned," Susannah said pleasantly and picked up her carpet bag. Agnes made a sound somewhere between approval and skepticism and led her up the path toward the house. The Falk Mill house was large and clean and emptier than any occupied home had a right to be. Clean in the way that comes from discipline rather than comfort. Surfaces wiped, floors swept, nothing out of place, but nothing arranged, either. Nothing personal except a child's drawing tacked to the wall beside the kitchen window, done in charcoal on brown paper, a lopsided tree with a figure standing under it, and at the bottom in a child's careful capitals, "For Papa." Susannah set her bag down in the kitchen and stood looking at the drawing for a moment, longer than was strictly necessary. Agnes appeared in the doorway behind her. "His daughter," she said. "Lily, she's with her grandmother in Portland, has been for 2 years." Susannah turned away from the drawing and rolled up her sleeves. She made biscuits and a pot of venison stew, the kind of food that did its job without requiring anything back. She set the table the way her mother had taught her. Plate centered, spoon laid straight, a jar of water in the middle. When Dorian Falk came in from the mill at 6:30, she watched him stop in the kitchen doorway for just a moment when he saw the table laid. Something moved across his face. Then he sat down without a word and ate. They sat in silence, so complete she could hear the river from where she sat. She ate steadily, not watching him more than politeness required, not trying to fill the quiet with conversation. It was Dorian who spoke first. "The biscuits are good," he said. "The way a man states the temperature outside, a plain fact." "Thank you," she said. "My grandmother's recipe." Silence. "You were a nurse," he said. Not quite a question. "A nurse's assistant," she said. "During the war, I was 17 when I started. I helped with records and supply management as much as with patients." She paused. "Numbers don't frighten me, and neither does blood." He looked at her then. Really looked at her, for the first time since the dock. "Early start tomorrow," he said, and pushed back from the table. "I'll have breakfast ready," she said. He nodded once and left the kitchen. Susannah sat alone at the table for a while, listening to the house settle around her, the distant hush of the river, the creak of Dorian Falk's footsteps above her head, and the vast Oregon dark pressing against the window glass. She wrapped her hands around her cooling coffee and let herself feel all of it at once. The strangeness, the distance she'd come, the uncertainty of what was next. And then she took a slow breath and set it all back in its place. She had not expected easy. She had been right not to. The first 2 weeks were an education in controlled distance. Dorian Falk ran his mill with the focused efficiency of a man who had reorganized his entire life around the things he could still do perfectly, and avoided, with great care, anything that reminded him of what he could not. Susannah noticed the right hand on the second day. He handled tools and equipment without difficulty, had the grip strength for timber and rigging and most of the physical demands of the mill yard. But when it came to fine motor work, writing, signing documents, anything requiring sustained precision, he paused. Sometimes he did it with his left hand. Sometimes Agnes did it. Once she saw him set a pen down after only a few words and walk away from the desk without finishing what he'd started. She said nothing. She had learned in the field hospitals that a man's injury was his own until he chose to share it. You did not name a thing out loud before he was ready to. She found the letter on the 13th day. She had not been looking for anything in particular. She was organizing the mill's supply accounts, which she had been given permission to review on. The second week after the figures she quoted at supper proved accurate enough to earn a grunt of acknowledgement from Dorian. And, more tellingly, a look of mild alarm. The letter was tucked between two ledgers, as though filed there in haste. It was addressed to Dorian from a law office in Portland, dated 6 weeks prior. She read the first paragraph and set it down and pressed both palms flat on the desk and breathed. The letter was from an attorney representing Clement Falk, Dorian's older brother. It stated, in the careful language of people who do terrible things with complete technical precision, that Clement Falk was petitioning the Oregon Territorial Court to have Dorian Falk declared legally incompetent to manage the Falk Timber Company on the grounds of his sustained physical incapacity following the accident of 1871. It cited the mill's declining account balances. It cited his failure to appear at 3 scheduled business meetings. It cited, in a line that made Susannah's jaw tighten, his sending for a mail-order bride as evidence of an inability to maintain normal social and professional function without outside assistance. She read it twice, then she picked it up and went to find Dorian. He was in the mill yard. She walked to him directly and held the letter out. "You left this in the account ledgers," she said. He looked at the letter. His face did not change, which told her everything. The particular stillness of a man who has been living with a fact so long it has stopped having the power to surprise him. "That's private," he said. "It was between 2 ledgers you told me to reconcile," she said. "I'm not sorry I read it. You should have told me." A muscle in his jaw worked. "It isn't your business. The fact that your brother is trying to take your mill and is using our marriage as evidence against you," she said steadily, "has become my business. Wouldn't you say?" He was very still. Around them the mill yard continued its noise. The saws, the shouting of the crew, the knocked timber against timber. Dorian Falk stood in the middle of all of it and looked at her with the expression of a man who has been carrying something alone so long that he has forgotten what it feels like to set it down, and is not certain he trusts anything that looks like an offer. "You don't know Clement," he said. "I don't need to," she said. "I know what those numbers say. The mill is profitable. The accounts are not in decline. They're disorganized, which is a different thing entirely, and I've only been at them 2 weeks. What exactly is your brother claiming you can't do?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Sign contracts," he said finally, flat and direct. "He knows about the hand. He has been collecting documentation for a year." "Has he seen these accounts?" "No." "Then he's working from old information," she said, "and he'll keep working from it until someone shows him something current." She met his eyes. "Sit down with me tonight. Bring everything you have from the last year. We're going to go through it." He didn't answer right away. "You went to war at 17, he said. "Not quite a question." 16, she said. "I lied about my age." Something behind his eyes shifted, the same almost imperceptible movement she had seen on the dock, but deeper this time, and slower. More reluctant, like something deciding. "After supper," he said. They worked by lamplight from 8 o'clock until well past midnight. He brought everything, the contracts, the supply agreements, the timber rights documentation, the correspondence with the Portland buyers that had lapsed when he stopped answering letters. She read all of it, and he watched her read it, and she asked her questions, and he answered them short and exact, the way a man answers when the information matters to him, and he has no patience for softening. He was, she discovered in those hours, considerably more capable than his brother's letter suggested. The mill's problems were not incompetence. They were the fingerprints of a man who had, for a period of roughly 18 months, stopped believing the future was worth working toward. She had seen those fingerprints before. She recognized them. "What happened in 1871?" she said, not a question, sometime after 11. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "The accident took 2 fingers," he said. "The right hand, ring finger and middle. They saved the hand, but the grip in those 2. He paused. "Clement was here when it happened. He was the one who called the surgeon." Another pause. "He's been waiting ever since." "And Lily?" she said carefully. The name landed differently than anything else she'd said. She watched it land. "Her mother died when she was born," he said. 1869, 3 years before the accident. So Lily has spent most of her life with a father who was either grieving or healing. He set down the paper in his hand and looked at the wall. "Her grandmother is better for her than I've been." "Is that what you think?" she said quietly. "Or is that what you've told yourself?" He looked at her sharply. "I'm not asking to be unkind," she said. "I'm asking because there's a difference." A long silence, the lamp burned between them. "Both," he said finally. She nodded. "All right. Then we fix what we can fix, and we let Lily be the part that gets better on its own time. But I need you to write to the Portland buyers tomorrow, all 3 of them, and I need you to let me draft the responses to your brother's attorney." "You're not a lawyer," he said. "No," she said, "but I spent 2 years managing the supply records of a field hospital during a war, and I know what a fraudulent accounting claim looks like. Your brother has been telling the court this mill is failing. I can show exactly where that story falls apart." She met his eyes. "If you'll let me." He looked at her across the lamplight, and the papers spread between them. She held his gaze without flinching, because she had learned not to flinch at things that mattered. "All right," he said. Agnes, it turned out, had her own opinions about Clement Falk, and had been keeping them to herself for 2 years out of a conviction that Dorian did not want to hear them. "He's been in town," she told Susannah the next morning, over coffee, "twice in the last month, talking to mill workers, telling them the business is in trouble, trying to get them to consider other employment." She set her cup down. 3 men left last month. I didn't think it was worth mentioning." "It's worth mentioning now," Susannah said. She went to town that afternoon. Heron Landing was small, 2 saloons, a general store, a church, a land registry office. And she went to the land registry office first, because she had learned that the public record always knew more than it admitted. What she found took an hour and a half. When she came out, she sat in the wagon for a long moment in the afternoon light and looked at her notes. Clement Falk had filed the incompetency petition. That she knew. What she had not known was that he had also, quietly, over the course of the past year, approached 2 of the mill's largest timber contract holders in private. She found the correspondence referenced in the land office filings. A contract dispute that Clement had inserted himself into as a mediator without Dorian's knowledge. He was not just trying to have Dorian declared incompetent. He was trying to redirect the mill's contracts to a holding company in which Clement himself held an interest. It was not grief. It was not concern for his brother. It was a transaction. She told Dorian that evening, all of it, laid plain across the kitchen table, and she watched him go through the same sequence she had seen in the mill yard. Comprehension, controlled anger, and then something harder and cleaner underneath. The look of a man who has been bracing for a blow so long that its arrival is almost a relief. "He told me it was for Lily," Dorian said, very quiet. "That if I couldn't manage the mill, the best thing was to sell it and put the money into a trust for her." "That's what made it convincing," Susannah said. A long silence. "What do we do?" he said, and it was the first time he had used we. "The mill workers first," she said, "the ones still here. Not to ask them to testify, just to let them see what's actually in the accounts, what this mill is actually worth. People leave when they're afraid, and right now they're afraid because your brother has been feeding them bad information." She paused. "After that, we write to your attorney in Portland and show him what I found in the land registry. The contract redirection is documented. That's not incompetence. That's fraud." He stared at the papers. "You found all of this in a land registry office in an afternoon." "I know what to look for," she said. My father lost his business to a man who moved money through holding companies. By the time I understood what had happened, there was nothing left to recover." She looked at Dorian steadily. "I swore I would recognize it the next time I saw it." He looked at her for a long, long moment. Something in his face moved in a way she hadn't seen before, not the controlled, measured expression she had learned to navigate, but something underneath it, something that had not been aired in a long time. "Why didn't you say that when you arrived?" he asked. "Because it wasn't relevant then," she said. "It is now." He was quiet. The river made its sound outside, low and constant. "I need to write to Lily," he said. "I haven't written in 3 weeks." "Write tonight," she said. "I'll help with the Portland letters in the morning." He nodded and stood and paused at the kitchen doorway the way he sometimes did, as if leaving the room required a small decision. "Susannah," he said. "Just her name, the first time without the miss." "I know," she said. He went to write to his daughter. She stayed at the table and worked on the Portland letters until the lamp needed trimming, and then she trimmed it and kept working. And the house was quiet around her in the good way, the way a house is quiet when something inside it has been decided. The crew meeting was held on a Saturday morning in the open yard of the mill, and Dorian Falk stood in front of the men he'd worked alongside for years and spoke plainly. He told them what the accounts actually showed. He told them what Clement had been doing. He told them there was a legal process underway, and that any man who wanted to leave could have a fair letter of recommendation, but that if any man wanted to stay, the mill would be here. 14 men stayed. 2 had questions, and Susannah answered them, standing at Dorian's shoulder, and neither of them made it a point to look at each other while she did. The territorial court had the Portland attorneys filing by the end of the following week. The evidence of contract redirection, combined with the current account, ledgers Susannah had reconciled, produced something the original petition had not accounted for. A mill that was not failing but had been deliberately isolated from its own contracts. The judge reviewed the filings and dismissed the incompetency petition. The contract redirection claim was referred for a separate fraud investigation. Clement Falk did not appear in Heron Landing after that. What he had built required no one to see him clearly. Once seen, it collapsed. Lily came home in July. She was 5 years old, with her father's eyes and her mother's laugh, and she arrived on the riverboat with her grandmother and a rag doll and an opinion about everything. She looked at Susannah for approximately 45 seconds when they were introduced, and then she asked, very seriously, whether Susannah knew how to make biscuits. "I do," Susannah said. "Agnes's biscuits are good," Lily said, "but Papa says your grandmother's recipe is better." Susannah looked at Dorian. He was studying the middle distance with the studied blankness of a man pretending he had not said exactly that. "Then let's find out," Susannah said, and took Lily's hand and walked her up to the kitchen. She heard Dorian exhale behind them, long and slow, the breath of a man who has been holding something for a very long time and has finally cautiously set it down. That evening, after Lily was asleep and the drawing still held its place on the kitchen wall, Dorian found Susannah on the porch. The river was dark below and the Oregon sky was wide and crowded with stars. He stood beside her without touching her, which was his way of being close. "I should have told you," he said, "about Clement when you arrived." "You didn't know me yet," she said. "I knew enough," he said. She looked at him. The scar along his jaw caught the light from the window behind them. He was watching the river, and his right hand rested on the porch railing, the 2 absent fingers, something she had long since stopped noticing and simply accepted as part of the landscape of him. "You kept the drawing," she said. "I always kept it," he said. He paused. "I just couldn't look at it for a while." She nodded. She understood the difference between keeping and looking. She had learned it herself, in smaller ways, in the years between her mother's death and the boat that brought her west. "I'm going to stay," she said. Not as a question, not as reassurance, just as a fact she was stating out loud for the first time, the way you mark a thing by naming it. He turned and looked at her. Really looked at her, the way he had on the dock but without the distance behind it, without the wall. "I know," he said, and then quieter. "I think I knew before you did." "Don't tell me that," she said. "It'll go to your head." The sound he made was almost a laugh. Not quite, but close. The unguarded, slightly surprised sound of a man remembering he still had it in him. He reached over and took her hand, the right one, the careful grip, the grip that had learned to hold what mattered without holding too tight. She let him. The river kept moving. The stars kept their position above the Oregon dark, indifferent to everything below, and somehow, because of that, exactly right. And the mill sat on the bank where Dorian Falk's grandfather had built it, solid and lit, and belonging to no one but the man who had refused to let it go, and the woman who had arrived on a Thursday afternoon and refused, with everything she had, to let him stop fighting for it.